Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human Podcast. On today's episode, we're talking food chemicals. I'm speaking with Dr. Maricel Maffini, who's had 25 years of research experience. She was senior scientist at Natural Resource Defense Council, a senior science officer at the Pew Charitable Trust. We're talking food chemicals, the regulatory system for foods, thyroid effects of many chemicals, and so much more. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have a colleague of mine, Dr. Maricel Maffini, who's a remarkable researcher and consultant in the area of food chemicals, and I'm going to let her talk all about that. So thank you for joining us on this podcast. Hello, Maricel. How are you? And really appreciate you being here.
That's my pleasure, Elise. Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right in. Tell us what you do and how you got into this field, which is such a very specific field of what you research and your consulting work.
Sure. I'm currently doing working in the intersection of policy and chemical safety, specifically chemicals that are purposely used in food, like your colors, your flavors, your preservatives, but also chemicals that come along for the ride, either getting to food from food packaging or from processing equipment or anywhere along the supply chain. There could be chemicals that get into food. So I am interested in understanding how those decisions are made, what kind of information is used to make the decision that that particular use of a chemical is safe for human consumption, who makes that decision, and the robustness of the information that is used. And I came to this field after many years of doing so-called bench science. So working in a laboratory for many, many years, starting in Argentina where I did my PhD, and I came then to the US to do a postdoc, and there I have worked on cancer, specifically on breast cancer, how tumors start, what happened in the body when the tumor starts and why it starts, the role that genetics plays and the role that the environment plays in the development of tumors. I did quite a bit of work on how hormones are involved in the development and growth and health and disease of organs. And then I did a little bit of work also on three-dimensional tissues, because we are not flat, we are not two-dimensional entities. However, a lot of research is done on two dimensions when we are three-dimensional organs, and humans and animals are three-dimensional. And how organs and tissues connect to each other and talk to each other is different when you have a three-dimensional entity than when you have a two-dimensional entity. There are different physical forces, biochemical signals, etc. So because of the work I've done on chemical exposure and how that sort of shapes how organs are formed and end up basically setting a blueprint for the well-being of an organism, I became very interested in how those chemicals we're exposed to are regulated. So after years of doing bench research in Boston, I decided that my time in academia was over, and I wanted to move into policy. And I came to Washington, D.C., working on a research project, but a different kind. So this started in 2010, specifically looking at how FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that is the agency in charge of regulating additives in food, makes those safety decisions, and how the science it uses, and whether or not they are fully implementing the law that Congress passed in 1958. So that is how everything started.
So in 1958, this is your own segue into these questions is, Where do we stand with food policy in the United States, given what you've learned and where we stand now with, testing and oversight? And, what does the 1958 law from Congress really say about food chemicals?
The 1958 law is very good. It has a very protective safety standard. Basically, a company has to demonstrate that the use of a chemical is safe before it can be used in the marketplace, using food and put out for sale. So in lay's term, a chemical is considered guilty until you show that it's safe. So it's a very protective safety standard. When Congress passed the law, it was also very interested in the kind of the chronic effects of everyday uses of chemicals in the diet. We are not exposed to one chemical at a time when we eat. We eat them with our butter, with our margarine, with our cream cheese. I'm going through breakfast, as you can see. Fruit Loops, your orange juice, you name it. And then you have lunch, and then you have snacks. They're everywhere. And they play a very important role because, in a way, they will reduce spoilage and things like that. So because Congress at the time understood that we are consuming chemicals pretty much from the moment, even before, we are born. So there is an ongoing exposure to very small amounts, in some cases large amounts like sugar, of these additives. And what is the consequence? What are the consequences of that ongoing exposures? And that's why they wrote something very interesting in the law that is a requirement that whomever makes a safety determination that a use of a chemical is safe must consider three things. And this is mandatory. One is whether or not there is exposure. If there is no exposure, there is basically no risk. Use some corrective factors because the data is never perfect. There's a lot of data that comes from animals. We are not really much alike, and we are maybe more susceptible than some of the animals that we are using to test some of these chemicals, and that is called safety factors. And then it says that before a new chemical is assessed for safety, you have to take into consideration other chemicals that are already in the diet, that look alike, that are chemically related, or even if they don't look alike, that they cause similar biological effects.
So mixtures. You're talking about mixtures of other chemicals together that are similar in their effects.
Right. So it is what is called, in the law, is called cumulative effect of chemically related or pharmacologically related substances in the diet. So just to give you an example, there is something called perchlorate that is used in rocket fuel, but it's also used in plastics to prevent the static charge when dry foods move through plastic at a rapid pace, at high velocity.
Would this be my dog, like for example, my dog food is dry food. Even though it's dog food, it's still kibble. Is cereals, dog food, that kind of food?
Cereals, rice, sugar. You may have seen them in the highways. There are sometimes trucks loaded with huge sacks of something. They're used in construction too, but they can carry 1 ton of a dry material. So usually, as I said, cereals or rice, things of that sort. So you lift it up and then you open up from the bottom. And all that dry material goes through the hole at the bottom at very high speed. If you don't have something, because it's dry and it's plastic, it will generate a spark. And you can cause a fire. So, perchlorate is used as an anti-static agent in the plastic that is lining those big bags. That is just an example of the use of perchlorate. But perchlorate is a very well understood endocrine disruptor because it blocks the functioning of the thyroid gland that is right here on your neck, and you know that better than me. You are the physician here. But it prevents the thyroid gland to make the hormones because it blocks the iodine to get into the gland that is needed to make the hormone. Well, that is one chemical that is in the diet. Then there is another one called nitrate. Nitrates are found in cold cuts, in bacon, in cured meats. They're also found in pesticide contaminations and in drinking water because of fertilizers. So nitrates is also in the diet, and it works in the exact same way in your thyroid. So both perchlorate and nitrate are blocking the iodine to get into the thyroid gland to work normally. Then there is another one that is called thiocyanate. Then there is another one called bisphenol A and phthalates. They may not work in the same way, but they also affect the functioning of the thyroid gland. So all those, plus others, plus natural foods like cabbage and broccoli, all work in the thyroid gland. So what the law says is that, forgetting the vegetables part, but all those chemicals that are allowed to be in the diet should be looked at together as a class because they are all affecting the same organ. And it's like a drip, drip, drip situation. They may work fine, the gland works okay, was okay, and then it's a little slower, and then slower, and then there is a crash. And that's when you get sick.
Which is interesting that you mentioned that because as a clinician, I'm seeing so much hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, which is, initially starts off with, as an autoimmune. But essentially what you do makes its way all the way down to what I do, which is actually treating people even at younger and younger ages that have thyroid conditions. And people are wondering why they're on thyroid medication at such a young age. It's perhaps the convergence of what you do, which is studying these chemical effects on thyroid and inhibiting thyroid hormone, T4, and then thyroid hormone, but also this nutritional deficit. As you know, we have a deficiency deficit of a lot of different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, but especially iodine, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, the iodine, the latest studies from the CDC indicates that more than half of the pregnant women in the U.S. are below the necessary amount of iodine to produce sufficient thyroid hormone. And that is super important because when you're pregnant in your first trimester specifically, your baby's brain absolutely needs thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone is crucial for the development of the baby's brain. And then in the second trimester, the baby's thyroid gland starts to grow, and it may produce some, but it always needs the thyroid hormone from the mother. And if you start already with a low amount of iodine, and on top of that, you have perchlorate exposure, too much nitrate in your diet, etc., your thyroid just kind of gets very tired and very slow.
And has effects on IQ of newborns. And so this is a lot of neurodevelopmental effects in newborns.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's one of the first things that a newborn is tested for.
Yeah. And so that's kind of critical, but there's other exposures from perchlorate, which I know we're talking mostly about food chemicals, but you get exposed through drinking water. So when you're mixing formula and you're using water that has perchlorate contamination from runoff at many, many sites throughout the world, including the United States, because perchlorate also comes from fireworks, military explosions.
Yes.
And so, in fact, it's concentrated very often around military bases and Superfund sites. So you're talking about this sort of, exposure, not just from the food people are choosing at the supermarket, but also in their own homes when they turn on the water and the tap, and it gets it into baby food and into just, adults themselves as well, adults and children.
Right. And there is an additional source that is less known, that is through bleach. So bleach is hypochlorite, usually sodium or calcium hypochlorite. And it's good. It's good for cleaning. It's a good disinfectant. The problem is that when bleach ages, or bleach is left it's not managed well, it's left in the heat, or it's not diluted out with water right away, it produces perchlorate. So there's a very interesting study that it doesn't take too long for perchlorate to start going up and contaminates the bleach. Not only contaminates the bleach, now perchlorate is a problem, but bleach is less efficient to do its job. And that is one of the reasons that some of the fresh vegetables have been shown to have very high levels of perchlorate. FDA's own studies show that when they tested perchlorate in spinach, peppers, and the like, have very high levels of perchlorate. And one of the reasons could be they are in the fields, there are big tanks where the vegetables, the produce is dunked just to get rid of the pathogens, potential contamination of pathogens. And then there may or there may not be a rinsing mechanism, a rinsing step. So the perchlorate stays in the vegetables. And same thing when you clean processing equipment at a factory. I think the highest level of perchlorate I've seen was in bologna.
It was in bologna. Eating
bologna.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because perchlorate is an allowable food wash. Isn't it considered allowable under FDA regulation?
No.
Or they're doing it outside.
Bleaches.
Okay. Gotcha. Bleaches.
And that's where it comes from.
Well, boy, we used a lot of bleach during this last year and a half of COVID. That is for sure. And so you're saying that the same bleach that we bring into the house to throw into our whitewash or to clean the countertops, even if it's diluted, that's the same hypochlorite bleach that can decompose into perchlorate, which stays on surfaces and can make their way into our bodies. Is that correct?
Right. I think the commercial bleach, it has a very quick turnaround, and people use it relatively fast. So I wouldn't be that concerned about that. But if you are like me, that sometimes buy a bottle of bleach and doesn't use it in a year or two, well, that's the problem, because that bleach is going to be contaminated, because it's just with time.
Right.
It's a chemical reaction.
So I think one of your recommendations, actually, because you wrote a chapter in our textbook and with Fred and I back in 2017, Dr. Vamsal and I, a beautiful chapter actually on food additives. And I think one of your recommendations was to get rid of bleach after 6 months if you're keeping it in your home. And
Yes, that's ideal.
Yeah.
All you can do is you can cut it down with water right away.
So diluting makes it less worrisome.
Correct.
Okay.
Keep it in a cool place, away from the light, and if you can, just dilute it out, 1 1/3, something along those lines, and then you can further dilute it out when you need it.
Okay, that's excellent. That's great advice. So let's go back to food chemicals again. How many food chemicals are there in the U.S. food system?
This is an estimate that we made in 2013, and we estimated around 10,000 chemicals, of which at least, and I think this number is much bigger than this, but at least 1,000 nobody knows about.
And how do they get through the system? I mean, tell me a little bit about even the GRAS, notification program and how that works, which stands for generally regarded as safe.
Right. So there are mostly three ways that a chemical can get into the food supply. It could be through what is called a food additive petition. Regardless of what method is used, the standard of safety is always the same. It's called reasonable certainty of no harm. They are guilty until shown to be safe, right? You have to have reasonable certainty in the minds of competent scientists that no harm will be caused, using those three requirements that I mentioned at the beginning: probable consumption, the safety factors, and the cumulative effects. So that applies to everything.
From scientists or from the manufacturers?
Well, the manufacturers are the ones that make the safety determination, always. It's their obligation. And then they have three paths that they can take. They can go to the FDA and submit what is called a food additive petition. And there they lay out their case. They have to show how the manufacturing process, how much is used, how much people are going to be exposed to, which are the safe levels, etc., etc. And that is a process that takes some time, and FDA makes the decision. And that decision goes into the Code of Federal Regulations. That's what it's called. And the public has an opportunity to comment on it and to object if they see that there are problems with that decision that FDA made. Also, the public can sue the agency. Anybody can sue the agency on that decision if they consider that it's not adequate. There is a second path where the companies can say, my assessment is that this is generally recognized as safe. The use of this chemical in these conditions is generally recognized as safe. And what it does is sends a notification to the agency. And FDA reviews that assessment. And if FDA agrees, they publish a letter saying at this time we don't have any questions about this assessment, and that a letter is put on a website, FDA website, and the company move on. So they have what is called a no questions letter. FDA, in that case, the agency says that they don't own the decision. They just provide an opinion. It's like a reviewer, right? And then there's a third option where the companies completely avoid and bypass the agency's review. And that is what we call a secret self-determined GRAS. So the FDA has allowed companies to do that for a long time. And you can talk to lawyers and they will tell you that it's not clear whether or not that was a legal move from FDA, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can provide references for those interested.
It all seems so shady to me. I mean, I guess, I'm a layperson, so to speak, because, I'm sort of eating the foods and not questioning where it comes from, as most of us do. But when you really look under the hood, you start to wonder how much testing was really done. There was none third party, right? It's done by the manufacturers. So we're taking them at their word that what they're doing is legitimate. We're hoping the FDA review from what they receive is also reviewed well. So, I guess what are your thoughts on the food system? I mean, you've been doing this a long time, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And I'm sure it matters depending on which chemical, right? Because some chemicals, I'm sure you've had no fault with, based on your own experience. So,
right. I think the food additive petition is what Congress intended. That the agency owns the decisions, and if they have problems, they will not allow it, right? With that part of the process is not transparent. So if you want to know what happened, you have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the agency. So it is good because there's a lot of information there, but it's secret. The GRAS notifications, it is a sort of a compromise. FDA reviews it, but it is just an opinion. However, the public can see the information that was submitted to the agency. And you can make your own objections, and you have the information right away. Now, the main problem is when companies don't like the questions that FDA asks them when they submit those notifications, and then they can say, well, thank you for reviewing, and we are asking you to stop this process. And then they withdraw the notification, and they go their merry way, selling and marketing the products anyway. And then the third option is appalling. It is hard to understand how the agency that is in charge of protecting public health doesn't know what is in the food supply.
Yeah, I mean, it all seems a little daunting. And in fact, now if you look at where we stand now, I mean, we know bisphenol A, BPA, which lines the cans of most canned foods, if not all canned foods worldwide and in the U.S., has endocrine disrupting capabilities, immune system disrupting capabilities, and yet that makes its way into the food system, as do food dyes. Red dye number 50 or 40 and blue and yellow and all that business, but also potassium bromate. So I guess the question is, can we remove them from the market once they've been now ad hoc, found to be problematic, and shown after the fact, after they've made it into the market, like so many chemicals do, before testing is fully complete? Are any chemicals removed? Have you seen chemicals removed from the food system? Because only BPA, as far as I know, is removed from baby bottles, plastic baby bottles, and that was it in 2012.
Right. Yes, there are a few chemicals, and I played a role in that part. I think the main problem here is that the law is put all the weight in the pre-market, and there is no review of the science of chemicals that were approved in the 60s or 70s, and we now know are problematic. There is not a systematic process to go back and look at the science and the decision and the data that was used to make that decision at the time. Is this still safe? There is no reassessment program at FDA. Now, yes, some chemicals have been removed, and there are two ways that you can remove a chemical. For BPA, what happens is that the American Chemical Council submitted a petition to FDA saying that the use of bisphenol A to make baby bottles was abandoned. No more. So FDA reviewed that petition, and they agreed, and that was struck down from the regulations. So BPA cannot be used to make perchlorate, to make a polycarbonate to make baby bottles anymore. FDA did not make any declarations on whether BPA is safe or not. It just agreed with the fact that the use was abandoned.
Interesting. So there was enough weight for them to obviously, American Chemical Council, to put that through in terms of the scientific findings.
Right. They have to present the evidence that all their members and nobody in the country was using it. And they should control the imports. And I haven't read that petition, but
right.
The basis for the petition was abandonment.
And it wasn't extended to the other food packaging, like
correct.
cans, yeah.
Correct. So that's because the chemicals are approved for particular uses. It's not a blanket approval for any use that you want.
Got it.
So we have so far submitted petitions asking FDA to remove uses based on safety concerns. The first petition was for long-chain perfluorinated chemicals, your PFOA, your PFOS, and the like. We presented a petition. We argued that the uses, because of the new hazard information that was about these chemicals, that accumulate in the body, that takes years and years for the chemicals to leave the body, and because the exposures are ongoing, it never goes away. We presented the argument that the use didn't meet the standard of safety anymore. You cannot say that there was reasonable certainty of no harm.
And these are the chemicals, just to clarify for this audience, these are the non-stick chemicals,
Right.
for instance, non-stick pans, if you have those at home. These are the chemicals that you, and including me, years ago, sprayed on couches to make them stain guarded for the kids, not to spill ice cream on the couch.
Are used in pizza boxes, in carry-out containers, anything that make a paper grease-proof and waterproof.
Microwave popcorn it's still being used in.
Correct.
People should know that. Also the fast food wrappers, anytime.
Yes.
And also I believe some takeout food wrappers and packages like Chinese food maybe. I'm not sure if they're used on that as well. But they're anti-grease, anti-stain chemicals, Gore-Tex, rainproofing, that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to clarify.
Right.
So those chemicals are what you're saying you're now petitioning, knowing what we know about them in terms of their harm to human health. And
We did.
Yeah.
We
Great.
did, and FDA approved our petition. They granted the petition, and those chemicals have been banned in 2016.
Okay, great.
So they are completely gone from the food uses.
So even now, you're saying the food like, microwave popcorn won't have it in the packaging?
Not the long chain. They may have the short chains.
Are they any safer, the short chain?
No,
Oh, geez.
not at all.
Okay, so now we know this is a whack-a-mole, right?
Correct.
You get one out of the system, and then there's like 10 to follow. It's like bisphenol S and bisphenol FP or FB.
Let me tell you another success story, because I have another one. We also got FDA to ban 7 carcinogenic flavors. So these are flavors that are synthetic chemicals that are known to cause cancer in man or animal. And there is a provision in the law that says that no chemical known to cause or may cause cancer in animal or man must be used in food. So 7 of those are gone also. They were removed from the marketplace. And in that particular case, they extended benzophenone was one of the flavors.
Mm-hmm.
They extended that prohibition to benzophenone used in packaging.
So in other words, you can get it out of the food, but you need to take it out of the packaging as well, correct? Is what you were...
That is what FDA did on their own.
Okay, good. That's a win.
And then we have we have one for perchlorate, one petition asking FDA, and that was submitted in 2014, and we are back in the courts, and we sued them twice for it. And there's another petition that FDA has been sitting on for several years on all phthalates, all orthophthalates that are very known, well-known endocrine disruptors, affecting male reproductive development, affecting neurodevelopment. All 28, we requested the agency to revoke their uses.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
remarkable.
That is ongoing. But it's a piecemeal work. So to your point, it's the guacamole. How do we fix this? And there has to be an overhaul of the system. And the main one is updating the science. Because if you don't update the science, everything else, it remains the same. You can
Right.
make tweaks, but if you still think that the dose makes the poison, that endocrine
Right.
disruption is not necessarily a thing, that you can get away by testing only, healthy adult animals and not looking at effects during development, and that a little bit of chemicals is not going to hurt you, we are not going to go far.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole. If the rules of the game aren't changed, then the outcomes are always going to favor who makes the rules. And so right now the rules are broken. Really,
Right. I think closing that grass loophole, that everybody should try to get an independent review of their safety assessment, developing a reassessment process, prioritization, which chemicals should be looked at first, having a process to look at post-market. I mean, we know about phthalates in people now because they've been in the food supply since even before 1958. DEHP, the most studied of all the orthophthalates, was used in food processing and in packaging before 1958 already. So think about, we have, 6 decades of human exposure? We have plenty of information now on critical human health effects. And there is no trigger for the agency to do a reassessment unless people like me and others sit down and figure out a way to get them to reassess through a petition. And we have more petitions that we submitted. I mean, lead is still used in some food facilities or in some food contact situations, like in the machines to make coffee and tea and hot water. They can have brass in it with no really good limit for the amount of lead that you have in the brass.
it's amazing.
So we have a petition for FDA to deal with that, and so on and so forth.
Because the food chemicals don't just end up they're not just in the food as intentional food additives. There's the unintentional additives that come from the manufacturing process itself, going
Correct.
through the machines, going into the packaging itself. Then the chemicals leach from the packaging and make their way and migrate into the foods or drinks that carry that packaging. So the food chemicals end up being much more exponential than just dye number 50 or 40 or B6 that they wanted to add, that they intentionally
Correct.
added. So what are your recommendations? I know we only have a few minutes left. So tell me, you grew up in Argentina. Is that
Yes.
correct? And
Yes.
and the food system, I'm assuming that your food was a lot cleaner back then than perhaps even now living in the States. What are your recommendations that you think are worthwhile, knowing all that you know and all that you've researched and all that you're battling with food chemicals?
Well, let me tell you, I grew up in a dairy farm where we had planes going over our houses fumigating the fields. So I'm not sure it was cleaner.
No, I
It
agree.
was all
Yeah.
homemade
Yeah.
for sure. Most of it we have. Again, my hometown had less than 1,000 people, so there were not many stores. Everything was, from homemade pasta to you name it. And being from an Italian family, we had a lot of homemade good stuff. But now here, what we see in the market is highly engineered food with highly engineered packaging. So what you hear sometimes in many cases is we need to start eating organic food. We need to start having, local vegetable gardens and things like that. All those solutions are fine. They are not going to solve the problem for the great majority of Americans that cannot afford or don't have access to those things. And, at this time we are in a crunch. So many people without work. It is hard to say, try to avoid certain things. I eat everything. So I have canned food in my pantry. I have frozen food in my freezer. I have vegetables that I buy from local farms here in Maryland. We eat everything. I am trying to get a system that fixed that will work for everybody. In the meantime, for those that want to have some solutions at hand, call your favorite brands and start asking them, does my mac and cheese have phthalates in it? Does my tomato can has BPA in it? And why? And why are you not taking it out? What do we need to do? I think the market has a tremendous influence. And you see already lots of companies walking away from lots of chemicals, meaning that either they were not necessary, they can get away with it, or there are better alternatives. Popcorn bags. You go to Europe and you find them with no fluorinated chemicals in it for the most part. There are very ingenious people that know how to work the chemistries to make products that perform in the way the customers want, and they are more healthy for the people and for the environment.
Yeah, I think this is great. You're basically saying that we have to fight for all of us, not just for individuals. I'm so much more about what we can do for ourselves, but there's this swath of humanity that doesn't have access to organics, even in big box stores, which they do have quite a bit of now. Even water is a big beef. We can get reverse osmosis takes off perchlorate for the most part. Am I correct? Distillers can take off a large amount of these chemical contaminants from that other aspect of ingestion. So, clean food, less ultra processed. The more packaged, the more likely you're going to have more chemicals. Would you agree?
For the most part, yes. But I think the more processed, the more likely to have chemicals that come through the conveyor belts from bags and containers and hoses and pumps that are used in the manufacturing process. I think for the most part, I would say probably the packaging that you see at the store, it may be free from some of the nasty chemicals. The inks have been improved a lot. Inks were a source of chemicals for a while.
The ink, you're talking about the printing on the packaging.
Correct. So, and again, organic foods come in plastic packaging.
Yes.
So,
it's the hypocrisy of that. I know. Looking for organic products in plastic bottles that have BPA or canned foods. I know it's a very difficult process. So
we don't need to wrap bananas. They already come in their own.
I've seen that.
Packaging.
I've seen people do that. They peel them and put them in plastic packaging. I think I used that in one of my slides for a lecture, thinking, gosh, we really have lost our minds at this point. Yes. Well, I don't want to, take too much more of your time. This has been invaluable. I guess the last a couple of minutes, is there anything you want to tell our audience? Are you hopeful? Are you feeling that we really have a way to move through this mess? Or do you feel like that, what are your thoughts given where we are right now?
I am hopeful. We have a new administration and everything, there is a great opportunity to influence a new administration. I think that's good. I think for anybody that has issues or questions about chemicals in their food or even in their environment should talk to their representatives. Let them know that they are not happy with business as usual. Let them know that the status quo is not it's not acceptable anymore. And I think we've been doing this work for a while, and I see some momentum going. So keep it up. Keep asking questions.
I love it. Thank you so much. Dr. Maricel Maffini, who is just an incredible food scientist and researcher. You've held so many incredible positions, which people will hear about and read on our website. Thank you for the work you do and for protecting us. And please keep going and doing more great work ahead of you. Really appreciate you being on the show and taking the time to share with our audience. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure and a great honor, Ailey. Thank you so much for your work and your advocacy.